My arrogant brother humiliated me in front of our parents, and it became the biggest regret of his life. Edmund thinks he is a comedic genius. He is not. He is an insecure bully who hides behind sarcasm. In my early 20s, I went through a brutal financial collapse. I lost my first business, a specialized logistics startup, and racked up $42,000 in debt. I spent 2 solid years living out of a dented 2004 Honda Civic, eating expired canned soup, and working overnight as a biohazard cleaner in downtown Chicago, just to survive. Edmund never let me forget it. At family barbecues, he would mock my desperate gears. Hide the good silverware, the repo man just walked in, he would announce when I arrived. My parents never intervened. He is just busting your chops, my dad would grumble. You need thicker skin, my mom would sigh. So, I learned to dissociate. I learned to swallow the bile and stare at the wall. I am 31 now. I paid off every single cent of that $42,000. I clawed my way into corporate supply chain management, and now oversee a regional division in Seattle, making a comfortable low 6 figures. 3 years ago, I met Cordelia. She is a pediatric oncologist, fiercely intelligent, and views me as the strongest man she knows because of what I overcame. I kept her far away from my family's toxic dynamic. I made up excuses for 3 Thanksgivings straight. Flights were too expensive, I had mandatory overtime, Cordelia was on call at the hospital. But this year, my parents rented a massive lodge in Aspen, Colorado, to celebrate their 40th wedding anniversary. They guilt-tripped me relentlessly, promising it would be a new chapter for our family. Cordelia convinced me to go. I want to see where you came from, she said gently. I will not let anyone disrespect you. We arrived on a Friday afternoon. Things were surprisingly cordial until Saturday night. We were all gathered in the main living room around the massive stone fireplace. Edmund announced he had put together a special presentation for our parents. He hooked his laptop up to the 7.5-inch television. The first few slides were standard family vacation photos. Then, the screen went black. A massive, high-resolution scan of my 2018 bankruptcy filing appeared on the screen, complete with my pathetic $14 bank account balance, highlighted in neon yellow. The next slide was a photo he secretly took of me sleeping in the passenger seat of a Honda Civic, mouth open, looking completely emaciated. And who could forget the dark years? Holding an imaginary microphone. Before our boy here found himself a sugar mama doctor, he was literally scrubbing human bodily fluids off warehouse floors. Hey Cordelia, did he tell you he once had to pawn our grandfather's watch just to buy ramen? Keep a close eye on your jewelry box tonight, babe. The room erupted. My dad chuckled, taking a sip of his scotch. My mom was giggling, shaking her head. I looked at Cordelia. She was not crying. She was absolutely furious. Her jaw was clenched so hard I thought her teeth might shatter. Instead of shrinking into myself, I stood up. I walked directly over to the television, grabbed the HDMI cable, and yanked it out of the wall so violently the plastic connector snapped in half. The laughter instantly died. What is your actual malfunction? I asked Edmund, my voice completely devoid of emotion. Bro, chill out. It is just a roast, he scoffed, putting his hands up in mock surrender. It is not a roast, I said, stepping directly into his personal space. It is a pathetic, desperate attempt to make yourself feel relevant, because you are a 8-year-old middle manager drowning in credit card debt who still needs mommy and daddy to pay your car insurance. Edmund flushed bright red. My mom gasped loudly. That is completely out of line, she yelled from the sofa. No, I fired back, turning to her. What is out of line is you two enabling this sociopath for 3 decades. You sit there and watch him mentally abuse your youngest son because it is easier than actually parenting him. I grabbed Cordelia's hand. We packed our bags in absolute silence and drove 2 hours through the dark to a Marriott in Denver. 2 weeks later, the real reason Edmund brought up my finances finally came to light. I received a frantic voicemail from him on Tuesday morning at 10:15 a.m. His wife had discovered he secretly gambled away $28,000 of their children's college fund on offshore sports betting apps. She was threatening divorce, and he was begging me to co-sign a high-interest personal loan to cover his tracks before she contacted a lawyer. He was crying, actually sobbing into the phone, telling me we were blood and that he had nowhere else to turn. I listened to that voicemail 3 times. The first time, I felt a surge of adrenaline so sharp it made my fingers itch. The second time, I felt a deep, hollow sense of pity. By the third time, I just felt tired. I didn't call him back. I put my phone face down on my desk and went back to my spreadsheets. I didn't tell Cordelia about it until that evening. We were sitting on our deck in Seattle, watching the mist roll in with the sound. I played it for her. She listened with her eyes closed. When it ended, she didn't say, you should help him, or that's awful. She just looked at me and asked, how much did you say he mocked you for that $14 balance? In front of 40 people at the lodge, I reminded her. The next morning, my mother called. She didn't lead with an apology for asking. She didn't even mention the fact that I'd snapped the HDMI cable or walked out on their anniversary. Your brother is in a very dark place, Leo, she said. Her voice had that specific shaky vibrato she used whenever she wanted something. Sarah is being very difficult. She's talking about taking the kids to her mother's in Ohio. Edmund he's fragile right now. He told me he reached out to you. He said you haven't responded. I haven't, I said. I was standing in the break room at work, watching the coffee machine drip. Leo, please, we are family. You know what it's like to be at the bottom. You of all people should have some empathy. He just needs a bridge. A little help to get through this month so he can fix things with Sarah. A bridge? I asked. He didn't ask for a bridge, Mom. He asked me to legally tie my credit and my future to his gambling addiction. He asked me to co-sign a loan for money he's already burned. Why aren't you and Dad co-signing it? There was a long pause. Your father. Well, we're on a fixed income now, Leo. And our credit isn't what it used to be after the renovations on the Florida house. We've already given him what we could spare from the savings. I felt a cold realization settle in my gut. They had already subsidized him. Again, they had been pouring water into a bucket full of holes for years while they watched me sleep in a car and told me to get thicker skin. I'm not doing it, I said. He's your brother, she shrilled. He was my brother when he was projecting my bankruptcy papers onto a 7.5-inch screen, too, I said, and I hung up. I thought that would be the end of it for a while, but Edmund is a cornered animal, and cornered animals don't go away quietly. 2 days later, he showed up at my office. I don't know how he got the address, probably poked through my mail while we were at the lodge, or badgered my mom for it. I was in the middle of a logistics review with 2 of my supervisors when my assistant knocked on the glass. She looked uncomfortable. There's a man in the lobby. He says he's your brother. He says it's a family emergency. My supervisors looked concerned. turned, I felt that old familiar heat rising in my neck. I excused myself and walked out to the lobby. Edmund looked terrible. He hadn't shaved in days. His expensive polo shirt was stained, and he smelled like stale cigarettes and cheap air freshener. He looked exactly like I did back in 2018, only I was 23 and he was nearly 40. Leo, please, he started as soon as the heavy glass doors swung shut behind me. He didn't even try to be smug. The comedic genius was dead. Sarah found a second account. She's calling a forensic accountant. If I don't get that money back into the 529 plan by Friday, she's going to the police for some kind of financial fraud. I don't even know if that's possible, but she's hysterical, Leo. Go home, Edmund, I said quietly. A few people from the marketing department were glancing at us as they headed to the elevators. I'll pay you back, every cent. I'll sign a contract. I'll give you the car. Just co-sign the loan. The bank said with your credit and income, it's guaranteed approval. I just need your signature. You want my signature on a document that says I'm responsible for 28 grand if you decide to put it all on the Celtics again? I looked him dead in the eye. The same signature that was on the bankruptcy filing you laughed at 2 weeks ago? I was joking. It was a bit, Leo. You know I'm a joker. He reached out to grab my arm, and I stepped back. The joke isn't funny anymore, is it? Please, if I lose the kids, I have nothing else. Dad won't help. He says he's tapped out. You're the only one with the cash. No, I said. I'm the only one with the discipline. There's a difference. Now get out of my office before I have security remove you. He didn't leave. He sat down in one of the decorative mid-century modern chairs in the lobby and started to cry. Not a quiet, dignified sob, but a loud, blubbering mess. My coworkers were staring now. This wasn't a movie. It was messy, embarrassing, and pathetic. I walked back to my desk and called building security. I had to watch through the glass as 2 guards in gray uniforms escorted my older brother out of the building. He was shouting back at me the whole way, calling me a cold-hearted snake and screaming that I'd forgotten where I came from. I went home that night and didn't eat dinner. I just sat in the dark. The next morning, I received an email from Sarah, Edmund's wife. We had always been friendly, though distant. She was a practical woman, a school teacher who had spent a decade putting up with Edmund's jokes. The subject line was, "I'm sorry." I opened it, expecting a plea for money. Instead, it was a PDF attachment. It was a series of bank statements and credit card bills. But they weren't just Edmund's. There were transfers, dozens of them, dating back 3 years. Transfers from my parents' retirement account into Edmund's investment account. My parents hadn't just been busting my chops about my financial failure. They had been watching me struggle while actively funding the very lifestyle Edmund used to mock me. While I was cleaning up blood and vomit in warehouses at 3 a.m., they were sending him $5,000 birthday gifts that he was dumping in parlor beds. But that wasn't the kicker. The last page was a scan of a handwritten note from my mother to Edmund, dated only 6 months ago. "Don't tell Leo about the extra help. He's always been so sensitive about money, and we don't want him feeling like we're playing favorites. He's doing so well now, he doesn't need it like you do." The room felt very small. I realized then that the new chapter they promised at the Aspen Lodge wasn't about reconciliation. It was a setup. They knew Edmund was sinking even then. They wanted me there so they could gauge how much I was worth, how much I could be squeezed for. The roast wasn't just Edmund being a jerk. It was a test to see if I'd still play the role of the family doormat. I picked up the phone and called my father. He answered on the first ring. "Leo, have you talked to your brother? Is it settled?" "It's settled," I said. My voice was very calm. "I saw the bank statements, Dad. I saw the transfers. I saw the note from Mom." The silence on the other end was heavy. I could hear him breathing, the faint sound of a television in the background. "Sarah shouldn't have sent you those," he finally muttered. "That's private family business. I am the family, Dad. Or I was supposed to be. You don't understand the pressure we were under, Leo. He has children. You don't. We couldn't let them lose their home. You let me live in a car," I said. "You told me it would build character. That was different. You were young. You were reckless with that business. I was 23, and I worked 80 hours a week. Edmund is 40, and he's a gambling addict, and you've been feeding it. Leo, don't be like this. We need to come together. If Sarah leaves him, he'll lose everything. The house is in her name, but the debt is joint. If you don't co-sign that loan, they'll lose the equity." "Good," I said. "Maybe he'll find a nice Civic to live in. I hear the 2004 models are very reliable." I hung up and blocked his number. Then I blocked my mother. I thought the escalation would stop there. I thought once I cut the cord, the drama would bleed out. But 3 days later, I got a notification from my Ring camera at the house. It was 2 p.m. I was at work. It was Edmund. He wasn't crying anymore. He was standing on my porch, staring directly into the camera lens. He held up a manila envelope. "I know where Cordelia works, Leo," he said, his voice eerily flat. "I know the hospital. I know her shift schedule. If you don't call me by 5 p.m., I'm going to make sure her board of directors gets a very interesting anonymous tip about your logistics history and some of the clients you used to carry. I did a little digging into your old startup, little brother. Those biohazard contracts? Some of them weren't exactly up to code, were they?" My heart stopped. My old startup had failed because of a massive paperwork error regarding waste disposal, a mistake made by a subcontractor, but one that fell on my head. It wasn't criminal, but in the world of high-level medical licensing and hospital boards, even the scent of a biohazard violation attached to a spouse could trigger an internal review. It was a bluff, but a dangerous one. He was threatening Cordelia's career to get his gambling money. I didn't call him. I called a lawyer I'd worked with during my bankruptcy, a man who specialized in difficult family transitions and financial protection. "I need a restraining order," I told him, "and I need to file a formal disclosure with my wife's employer before someone else does." But as I was talking, a text came through from an unknown number. It was a photo of Cordelia's car in the hospital parking garage. Edmund was already there. I didn't wait. I hung up on the lawyer, grabbed my car keys off my desk, and bypassed the elevators entirely, taking the 4 flights of stairs down to the parking garage. My hands were shaking so badly, I dropped my keys twice trying to unlock my truck. It was a 20-minute drive from my office in Bellevue across the bridge to Seattle Children's Hospital, assuming traffic was light, at 2 in the afternoon on a Thursday. It wasn't. I dialed Cordelia's number through the Bluetooth in my truck. It rang 4 times and went to voicemail. "Hey, it's Cordelia. Leave a message." I hit redial. Voicemail again. She was in with a patient. Pediatric oncology didn't stop for family drama. I sent a text using voice command. "Edmund is at the hospital. Do not engage. I am 10 minutes away." Traffic on the 520 bridge was at a dead crawl. I sat there staring at the brake lights of a Subaru in front of me, listening to my own breathing. I felt a cold, hyper-focused rage settling over me. Edmund had crossed a line that you don't come back from. You don't threaten a doctor's career because you blew your kid's college fund on a parlay. You don't bring my wife into your self-inflicted collapse. When I finally pulled into the hospital's visitor garage, I didn't bother looking for a proper spot. I dumped my truck in a loading zone near the elevators, threw the hazard lights on, and practically sprinted toward the staff parking sector. I saw him before he saw me. Edmund was leaning against the driver's side door of Cordelia's dark blue Audi. He looked even worse than he had at my office. His hair was plastered to his forehead with sweat, and he was smoking a cigarette right next to a massive red, no smoking, oxygen in use sign. He was furiously typing on his phone with his thumb, completely oblivious to his surroundings. Edmund, I said. My voice wasn't loud, but it echoed off the concrete pillars of the garage. He jumped, dropping the cigarette. He looked up, his eyes bloodshot and frantic. For a split second, I saw genuine fear in his face. He knew he was out of his depth. He was a middle manager who bullied his little brother at barbecues. He wasn't a street thug, but the fear vanished almost instantly, replaced by that desperate, cornered animal arrogance. You didn't call me, he said, holding up his phone. Step away from her car, I said. I kept walking toward him, closing the distance until I was less than 3 feet away. I could smell the stale sweat and the sour tang of old alcohol seeping through his pores. Did you think I was bluffing? He sneered, though his voice cracked slightly. You think you can just shut me out after everything Mom and Dad did for you? Step away from the car, Edmund. He didn't move. I need the money, Leo. I need it by tomorrow morning. Sarah packed a bag. She's leaving. If I don't show her a deposit receipt, she's walking out that door with my kids. And your brilliant plan was to come here and threaten my wife's medical license? I stared at him. He looked so small, just a pathetic, hollow man trying to use my trauma as a bargaining chip. You really think a hospital board gives a damn about a clerical error my subcontractor made 6 years ago? You think they're going to fire a top-tier oncologist because her husband's old startup had a paperwork violation? Edmund's face twisted into an ugly, desperate grin. It's not about firing her, Leo. It's about the investigation. I looked up the bylaws. Any formal complaint regarding biohazardous materials and staff spouses requires a mandatory preliminary inquiry. It goes on her permanent file. It flags her for administrative review. How do you think Dr. Perfect is going to feel having her squeaky clean reputation dragged through the mud because you were too cheap to help your own flesh and blood? I felt the bile rise in my throat. He actually researched it. He spent the last 2 days combing through hospital administrative policies just to find a way to hurt me. Give me the phone, I said. I already sent it. The words hit me like a physical blow. What? Edmund took a step back, holding his phone tightly against his chest. I sent it to the chief of staff, the ethics board, and the general PR inbox. Anonymous concerned citizen. Attach the public record of your violation and a nice little summary of how Dr. Vance might be compromised by her husband's shady business practices. It went out 5 minutes before you pulled up. He was breathing hard, waiting for me to hit him. He wanted me to hit him. He wanted to be the victim. Sir, hey, a heavy-set hospital security guard in a yellow vest was jogging toward us from the elevator banks, pointing at the crushed cigarette on the concrete. You can't smoke here, and you're not allowed in the staff parking area. Edmund looked at the guard, then back at me. 30 grand, Leo. That's all it takes. You wire it to me, and I'll send a follow-up email saying it was a hoax. I'll say I made it up, but you have until tomorrow, or I start calling the local news outlets. He didn't wait for my response. He turned and practically bolted toward the exit ramp, his dress shoes slapping loudly against the concrete. The security guard stopped next to me, out of breath. Is there a problem here, sir? The guard asked, eyeing me suspiciously. No, I said, staring at the empty space where my brother had just been. He was just leaving. I walked into the hospital through the staff entrance, my chest tight. I had to badge in at the front desk using my spouse ID. The lobby smelled like chlorhexidine and cheap coffee. I took the elevator to the pediatric oncology floor. I found Cordelia at the nurse's station. She was typing notes into a rolling computer cart, a stethoscope draped around her neck. She looked exhausted. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. She looked up as I approached. Leo, what are you doing here? I saw your text, but I was in a room. We need to talk, I said quietly. Is there somewhere private? She read my face instantly. The professional detachment slipped, and her eyes widened. She nodded to the charge nurse and led me down the hall to a small windowless consultation room used for delivering bad news to parents. She shut the door and turned to me. What happened? It's Edmund, I said. I kept my voice perfectly level, though my stomach was churning. He came to the garage. He wanted me to wire him 30 grand to cover his gambling debts. When I didn't answer his calls, Cordelia, he sent an email to the hospital ethics board and the chief of staff. She stared at me. An email saying what? He dug up the old biohazard paperwork violation from my logistics startup, the one from 2018. He spun it into some massive ethical breach and claimed you were complicit in hiding it. He's trying to trigger a mandatory administrative review to extort me. Cordelia didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just slowly sat down on one of the cheap vinyl chairs, resting her elbows on her knees and pressing the heels of her hands into her eyes. She stayed like that for a long, agonizing 10 seconds. Dr. Eris, she said, her voice muffled by her hands. What? Dr. Eris is the chief of staff, she said, looking up at me. Her expression was completely unreadable. He paged me 20 minutes ago. I thought it was about a bed shortage in the ICU. He asked me to come to his office at 3:30. I looked at the clock on the wall. It was 3:15. I am so sorry, I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I will hire a lawyer. I will sue him for defamation. I'll take care of it. Cordelia stood up. She smoothed the front of her scrubs. You can't sue someone who has no money, Leo. And a lawyer doesn't unring a bell with human resources. She walked past me and opened the door. I have to go to Eris's office. Go home. I will call you when I'm done. Let me come with you. Let me explain. No, she said sharply. She stopped in the doorway and looked at me. It wasn't anger in her eyes. It was pity, and somehow that was infinitely worse. If you come in there, it validates the drama. I am a doctor. I am going to walk in there, tell my boss that my estranged, gambling-addicted brother-in-law is trying to extort my husband, and I am going to offer him full transparency. Then I am going to come back here and finish my shift because I have a 9-year-old girl down the hall whose white blood cell count is crashing. She touched my arm, a brief clinical squeeze. Go home, Leo. I drove home in silence. The house in Seattle felt massive and empty. I sat on the living room sofa, staring at the blank television screen, waiting for my phone to ring. At 4:45 p.m., it did, but it wasn't Cordelia. It was my mother. I had blocked her number, but she was calling from my dad's phone. I stared at the caller ID for a long time before I finally hit accept. I didn't say hello. I just put the phone to my ear. Leo, Leo, my mother said. Her voice was thick with tears, breathless and panicked. Leo, thank God. You have to help us. Please, you have to help us. I told you I'm not giving him money, I said, my voice dead inside. It's not for him, she sobbed. It's for us. It's for your father and me. I frowned, sitting up slightly. What are you talking about? Sarah called us. She found more papers. Edmund didn't just empty the college funds. 6 months ago, he came to your father. He said he had a guaranteed investment, a bridge loan for a commercial property. He said he just needed collateral. The cold feeling in my gut returned, heavier this time. What did you do, Mom? Your father co-signed a home equity line of credit, she whispered, her voice breaking. On the Florida house. We put the house up, Leo. $120,000. He told us he was making the monthly payments. We didn't know he was dumping it into DraftKings or whatever it is. The bank sent a notice of default to Sarah's house by mistake. They're 30 days away from foreclosing on us. I closed my eyes. The sheer scale of the stupidity was suffocating. While they were sitting in that luxury lodge in Aspen, clinking scotch glasses and laughing at my $14 bank account balance, they were actively defaulting on their own retirement home because they trusted the golden child with their equity. He forged the last 3 months of payment receipts. My dad's voice suddenly came on the line. He must have picked up the extension in the kitchen. He didn't sound like the gruff, dismissive man who told me to get thicker skin. He sounded old, terrified. Leo, we don't have it. We gave him all our liquid savings years ago. Our Social Security barely covers the property taxes and groceries. If they take the house, we have nowhere to go. You want me to pay off $120,000 of Edmund's gambling debt to save your house? I stated flatly. It's a loan. We'll pay you back, my mother cried. With what, Mom? You just said you have nothing. We are your parents, my father shouted, a brief flash of his old temper returning. We raised you. We paid for your college. You make 6 figures, Leo. You live in $1 million house in Seattle. You can't just let us be homeless because you're holding a grudge over a stupid PowerPoint presentation. I stood up from the sofa and walked over to the sliding glass doors looking out over the Puget Sound. The sky was turning a bruised, stormy purple. It's not about the PowerPoint, Dad. It's about the fact that you watched me starve for 2 years. You watched me sleep in a Honda Civic in Chicago winter. You didn't offer me a dime. You told me I needed to learn the value of $1. And while I was learning that value, you were handing hundreds of thousands of dollars to Edmund so he could play pretend. He had a family, my mother wailed. You were single. It was different. And what about Cordelia? I asked. The rage I had been suppressing all afternoon finally cracked the surface. Is she family? Because your precious son just went to her hospital and tried to get her fired. He filed a fake ethics complaint against her to extort me. Silence on the line. Just the sound of my mother's ragged breathing. What? My dad finally asked, his voice weak. You heard me. He went to her job and threatened her medical license because he's a coward and a parasite, and you fed him. I gripped the phone so hard my knuckles popped. I will not give you a cent. If the bank takes the house, you can move into Edmund's guest room, assuming Sarah doesn't take that house in the divorce. Leo, please, do not call me again, either of you. I hung up. I blocked my dad's number. Then I walked into the kitchen, poured myself a glass of tap water, and drank it in one long gulp. My hands had finally stopped shaking. At 6:30 p.m., I heard the electronic chirp of the front door unlocking. Cordelia walked in. She dropped her keys in the ceramic bowl on the console table and took off her coat. She walked into the kitchen and sat down on one of the bar stools. How bad is it? I asked, leaning against the counter across from her. She let out a long, slow breath. Dr. Eris is a pragmatic man. I told him the truth. I showed him the text message you sent me about Edmund being in the garage. I told him my brother-in-law is an addict in financial freefall attempting extortion. And hospital policy is hospital policy, she said, rubbing her temples. They can't just ignore a written complaint mentioning hazardous waste and a staff member. They have to open a file. They have to pull the records from your old company. I've been placed on administrative leave for 3 days while legal reviews the file to ensure there's no active liability. They suspended you? I felt sick. Paid administrative leave. But yes, she looked at me, her eyes flat. I had to hand my patients over to Dr. Evans. I had to tell a mother whose daughter is starting a new round of aggressive chemo tomorrow that I won't be there because of the clerical review. Cordelia, I don't even know what to say. I'm so sorry. It's not your fault, Leo. She stood up and walked over to the fridge, grabbing a bottle of sparkling water. But it is your family, and I am telling you right now, this is the end of it. I will not have my career jeopardized by these people. I will not have them in our lives. They're gone, I said. I blocked their numbers. My dad called today. Edmund took out a second mortgage on their house and lost it all. They're getting foreclosed on. They begged me to bail them out. Cordelia paused, the bottle halfway to her mouth. What did you say? I told them to enjoy sleeping in their car. She nodded once, a sharp, decisive movement. Good. She took a sip of water. I got an email from Sarah while I was sitting in Eris's office. I frowned. Sarah? What did she say? Cordelia set the bottle down on the granite counter. She said she went to the police this afternoon. She reported the forgery on the college funds and the home equity line. But she also found something else in his desk, something she thought you needed to see. Cordelia reached into her scrub pocket and pulled out her phone. She tapped the screen a few times, then slid the phone across the island toward me. He didn't just research your old company, Leo, Cordelia said quietly. I looked down at the screen. It was a photo Sarah had taken of a printed document. It was a life insurance policy. It was my parents' life insurance policy, the one they took out 20 years ago, worth $500,000. I zoomed in on the beneficiary section. For 20 years, it had listed Edmund and me as 50 over 50 beneficiaries. But the document in the photo was a recent amendment form, dated just 4 days after we walked out of the Aspen Lodge. My parents had quietly removed my name. They had signed 100% of the death benefit over to Edmund. I stared at the glowing screen of her phone. 4 days. They had drafted, notarized, and filed the amendment 4 days after we walked out of that lodge. While I had been driving Cordelia through the dark mountains back to Denver, quietly apologizing for the scene I had caused, my parents had been sitting by the fire, legally erasing me from their legacy. It wasn't about the money. $500,000 split 2 ways 20 years from now wasn't going to make or break my life. It was the surgical precision of the insult. It was the absolute confirmation that my value in that family was strictly conditional. As long as I was the punchline, I was in the will. The second I defended myself, I was excised. Cordelia reached across the granite island and gently pulled the phone out of my line of sight. For your credit report, she said. Her voice was terrifyingly calm. Right now. I blinked, pulling myself out of the spiral. What? If he forged your father's signature on a home equity line of credit, and he had access to your personal information, your social security number, your old addresses, what makes you think he hasn't tried to open a card in your name? Pull it. All 3 bureaus. I opened my laptop. For the next 45 minutes, the only sound in the kitchen was the clicking of my keyboard and the rain starting to beat against the sliding glass doors. I ran Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion. My chest was tight the entire time, waiting for a massive red flag, a $50,000 personal loan, a maxed-out credit card tied to a Vegas IP address. Nothing. It was clean. My score was an 810. My mortgage and my 2 car loans were perfectly in order. Freeze them anyway, Cordelia instructed, pouring the rest of her sparkling water down the sink. All of them. We put a pin on everything. Tomorrow morning, you call your bank and put a verbal password on your accounts. He is desperate, Leo. Desperate people do not care about the law. They care about surviving the next 24 hours. I did what she said. I froze my credit. It felt strangely final, like locking the heavy deadbolts on a fortress. When I finally closed the laptop, my eyes burned. I have to find the manifests, I said quietly, rubbing my face. Cordelia stopped wiping down the counter. The logistics manifests? From 2018. If the hospital is going to do a formal review, they're going to pull the public record of the violation. The public record just shows the fine and the closure. It doesn't show the subcontractor's admission of fault. I have the original compliance letters. I kept them. Where? In a storage unit in Kent. It's an old 10 by 10 locker I rented when I lost the apartment in Chicago. I shoved all the business files, my old furniture, and everything I couldn't fit in the Civic into it. I've just been paying the $60 a month on autopay for the last 8 years. I haven't opened the door since. She looked at me. She knew what that meant. That storage unit was a crypt. It held the physical evidence of the absolute worst period of my life. Do you want me to go with you? She asked. No, you're on administrative leave. You need to stay away from anything related to my old company. If Human Resources asks, you maintain complete plausible deniability. You didn't know me in 2018. You don't know the subcontractor. You are just the collateral damage of a deranged brother-in-law. We went to bed, but neither of us slept. I lay on my back, staring at the ceiling, listening to the wind come off the Puget Sound. I kept thinking about Aspen. I kept thinking about the moment my dad chuckled at the PowerPoint slide showing my $14 bank balance. I wondered if he had already co-signed the disastrous HELOC by then. I wondered if he was laughing because he was relieved that I was the failure on the screen, and not the son who was quietly burning down his retirement. Friday morning was surreal. I woke up at 6, showered, and put on a suit. Cordelia was sitting at the kitchen table in her bathrobe, drinking coffee, staring blankly at a medical journal. She should have been at the hospital, prepping for morning rounds. Instead, she was grounded, benched because my brother couldn't stop placing bets on point spreads. I kissed the top of her head. She didn't look up, just squeezed my hand. I drove south down I-5 toward Kent. The traffic was brutal, a slow crawl of commuters in the gray Seattle drizzle. The storage facility was located in an industrial park tucked behind a row of auto body shops and a lumber yard. It was a sprawling complex of corrugated metal buildings surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. I punched my code into the keypad at the gate. The metal arm groaned and lifted. I drove down Road G until I found Unit 714. I had to use WD-40 from my trunk to get the padlock to turn. When I finally threw the heavy metal roll-up door open, the smell hit me instantly. Dust, old cardboard, and the faint, unmistakable scent of mildew and cheap motor oil. I stood in the doorway, the rain hitting the back of my neck, just looking at it. It was perfectly preserved. A museum of my failure. There was the stained mattress I couldn't afford to bring with me. There was the cheap particle board desk where I had drafted the bankruptcy papers. And stacked against the back wall were 8 heavy-duty banker boxes labeled LV Logistics 201722018. I walked in and pulled the chain to the overhead bulb. It flickered, casting a sickly yellow light over the dust motes. I pulled the first box down. It was heavy. I sat on the edge of the old mattress and popped the lid. For the next 3 hours, I dug through my own grave. I found the old bank statements, the red past due stamps that used to send me into panic attacks. I found a notebook where I had meticulously tracked my daily food budget. I found a page from February 2018 where I had written soup $1.29, crackers $0.99, total left $4.12. My chest physically ached. I had worked so hard to bury this version of myself. I had built a 6-figure career, bought a beautiful home, married a brilliant woman, all to prove that the guy who wrote down $4.12 wasn't me anymore. And Edmund had just dragged him right back out into the light. Finally, in the bottom of the 4th box, I found the manila folder labeled Compliance Subcon. Inside were the original carbon copies of the waste disposal manifests. Attached to them was the formal letter from the subcontractor, a guy named Marcus, taking full legal and financial responsibility for the mislabeled hazardous materials that had triggered the state audit. It was the smoking gun. It proved I was guilty of bad hiring, not environmental negligence. I put the folder in my briefcase, locked the unit, and drove straight to a FedEx office. I made high-resolution color scans of every document, compiled them into a single PDF, and emailed it to Cordelia with the subject line, the 2018 files. Then I went to my office. I had a division to run. I spent the afternoon in meetings about supply chain bottlenecks in the Pacific Northwest, pretending my life wasn't actively imploding in the background. At 4 p.m., my desk phone rang. It was an internal transfer from the front desk. Leo, it's Brenda in the lobby. There's a woman here to see you. She doesn't have an appointment. My stomach dropped. Is it my mother? No, Brenda said, her voice dropping to a confused whisper. She says her name is Sarah Vance. She has 2 kids with her. I closed my eyes. Sarah, send her up to the glass conference room, I said. Don't bring her to my desk. I walked out of my office and headed down the hall. The glass conference room was reserved for executive meetings, away from the main bullpen. When I walked in, Sarah was standing by the window, looking out at the Bellevue skyline. She was wearing sweatpants and an oversized hoodie. She looked like she hadn't slept in a week. Sitting at the massive mahogany table were my nephew, Mason, who was 12, and my niece, Lily, who was was 8. They were both staring at iPads, looking deeply uncomfortable. Sarah, I said, shutting the door behind me. She turned around. Her eyes were red-rimmed and swollen. I'm sorry, she whispered. I didn't know where else to go. I didn't want to do this over the phone. It's okay. Sit down. I pulled out a leather chair for her. Are the kids okay? I pulled them out of school, she said, wrapping her arms around herself. We're going to my sister's place in Spokane. I can't stay in the house, Leo. It's not safe. I leaned forward. Did he hit you? No, she shook her head quickly. No, nothing like that. It's the people he owes. I found a burner phone in his golf bag. It's not just offshore betting apps anymore, Leo. He's been borrowing money from people locally. Bad people. The kind of people who text your home address to you at 2 in the morning just to remind you they know where you live. A cold sweat broke out on the back of my neck. How much? 60,000, she choked out. On top of the HELOC, on top of the credit cards. He took a predatory loan to try and win back the money he stole from your parents, and he lost that too. They are calling my cell phone now. They know the kids' names. I looked at Mason and Lily. They had their headphones on, but Mason was watching us out of the corner of his eye. He was old enough to know the world was collapsing. I froze the accounts, Sarah said, wiping her nose with the back of her sleeve. I took whatever was left in my personal checking, packed 3 suitcases, and I'm leaving. The bank is going to take the house anyway. I filed the divorce papers this morning. I gave the lawyer all the evidence of the fraud. I'm washing my hands of him. Good, I said. You have to protect the kids. She reached into her purse and pulled out a thick yellow envelope. She pushed it across the polished wood table toward me. This came in the mail yesterday, she said. It's addressed to your parents, but it came to our house. Edmund must have used our address as the primary contact for the HELOC, so they wouldn't see the notices. I looked at the envelope. The return address was a massive national mortgage lender. Stamped across the front in red ink was Notice of Acceleration and Foreclosure. It's over, Sarah said quietly. They have 30 days to vacate the Florida property. And Leo, she hesitated, biting her lip. Edmund told them it was your fault. I let out a harsh, dry laugh. Of course he did. No, you don't understand, Sarah said, leaning closer. He told them that you promised to co-sign a consolidation loan for him, and that you backed out at the last minute because you were jealous of him. He told them you intentionally sabotaged the deal out of spite, and they believed him. Your mother called me screaming this morning, calling me a traitor for leaving him. She said you and I were conspiring to ruin him. They're delusional, I said. They are literally losing their home because of his signature, and they are blaming you. They are packing, Sarah whispered. The words hung in the air, heavy and sharp. Packing? I repeated. They have no money, Leo. They can't afford rent anywhere in Florida. They are packing up whatever they can fit in your dad's SUV. They are driving up here. They think they are going to move into our house in Seattle. But you're leaving, I said. The house is going into foreclosure. I know, Sarah said. She looked at me with a mixture of pity and terror. When they get here and find the house locked, the power turned off, and Edmund, living in a motel, where do you think they are going to go? My stomach plummeted. They couldn't possibly have the audacity. They have your address, Sarah said softly. Edmund gave it to them. I stood up. The air in the conference room suddenly felt very thin. Thank you for telling me, Sarah. You need to get on the road. Get to Spokane. If any of those debt collectors contact you again, call the police immediately. Do not answer Edmund's calls. She nodded, gathering her purse. She told the kids to pack up their iPads. I walked them down to the lobby and watched them get into her minivan. As she drove away, I felt a profound sense of doom settling over me. I practically ran back to my office. I locked the door and pulled out my phone. I unblocked my mother's number and dialed it. It went straight to voicemail. I dialed my father's number. Voicemail. They were already on the road. I called Cordelia. She answered on the first ring. Did you get the PDF? I asked immediately. I got it. I forwarded it to Dr. Eris and the legal team. It's exactly what they needed. It proves the violation was a third-party subcontractor issue. It should clear the review by Monday. She paused. You sound out of breath. What's wrong? Sarah just came to my office. She's leaving the state with the kids. Edmund is into local loan sharks for 60 grand. The bank officially foreclosed on my parents' house today. Okay, Cordelia said, her voice shifting into her clinical crisis management tone. That is terrible for them, but it doesn't change our position. We maintain the perimeter. Cordelia, they are driving to Seattle. Right now, they think they're moving into Edmund's house, but Edmund's house is gone. When they realize they have nowhere to go, they are going to show up at our door. Silence on the line. Then, very calmly, she said, no, they won't. They are desperate. Let them be desperate on the sidewalk. I will call the police and have them trespassed from the property the second they step onto our driveway. I am not playing this game, Leo. I am not letting your parents bring a loan shark's debt and a foreclosure crisis to my front porch. I know, I said, rubbing my temples. I'll call the security company. I'll have the gate codes changed. Do it now, she said. I'm gonna start dinner. I spent the next hour coordinating with my home security provider, changing the access codes and ensuring the exterior cameras were recording to the cloud. I felt like I was boarding up windows before a hurricane. I left the office at 6. I was exhausted. The adrenaline crash was hitting me hard. I just wanted to go home, sit in the dark, and eat whatever Cordelia was cooking. I pulled into my driveway, the heavy iron gates sliding shut behind my truck. I walked through the front door, shrugging off my suit jacket. The house smelled like garlic and roasted chicken. It felt incredibly safe. Cordelia, I called out, walking toward the kitchen. She wasn't at the stove. She was sitting at the dining room table. Her laptop was open, but she wasn't looking at it. She was holding her phone in her lap, staring straight ahead at the wall. Her face was pale, completely drained of color. Hey, I said, my heart kicking into overdrive again. What is it? Did the hospital call back? She slowly turned her head to look at me. Her eyes were sharp, dark, and filled with an emotion I couldn't quite place. It wasn't fear. It was a deep, simmering disbelief. My mother just called me, Cordelia said, her voice barely a whisper. I stopped walking. Your mother? From Portland? Yes. Cordelia swallowed hard. She said she was confused. She said she received a call from a man claiming to be your father. The floor felt like it was dropping out from under me. My father called your parents? He told my mother there was a family emergency, Cordelia continued, her voice trembling with suppressed rage. He told her that you and I were going through a severe financial crisis. He said you were too proud to ask for help, so he was stepping in to save us. He asked my parents to wire $60,000 to a secure escrow account to stop our house from being foreclosed on. I stopped. The audacity, the sheer sociopathic audacity of it. He wasn't just trying to extract money from me. He was trying to scam my wife's elderly, retired parents to pay off Edmund's loan sharks, and he was using my past trauma as the bait. He gave them Edmund's routing number, Cordelia said, standing up from the table. The chair scraped loudly against the hardwood floor. He tried to con my parents, Leo. He tried to steal from my family. Did they wire the money? I asked. The words scraped against grasped my throat. I couldn't feel my hands. No, Cordelia said. She didn't sit back down. She just stood there, holding her phone like it was a live grenade. My father was a forensic accountant for 35 years, Leo. He asked your dad for the name of the escrow company, the state bar number of the foreclosure attorney, and the exact physical address of the property in default. Your dad started stammering. He tried to play the emotional angle, telling my dad that family helps family. When my dad asked for the attorney's name again, your dad hung up. I leaned over the kitchen island, gripping the cool granite until my knuckles turned white. The roasted chicken sitting on the stove smelled nauseating now. Everything in the house felt tainted. I have to call him, I said, reaching for my pocket. I have to call Arthur. I already did, Cordelia said. I spent the last 40 minutes on the phone with him and my mother. I told them everything. I had to. I had to explain that your family is completely radioactive and that they are never to answer a call from an unknown number again. The shame was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest. Arthur and Helen had welcomed me into their family with zero hesitation. They knew about my bankruptcy. They knew about the years in the Civic. They had never once judged me for it. They had bought us our dining room table as a wedding gift. And my father, a man who wouldn't cross the street to hand me a glass of water when I was drowning, had just tried to defraud them out of their retirement savings to cover his golden child's gambling debts. Cordelia, I am so sorry. I don't even know how to... Stop apologizing, she told me, her voice sharp but not unkind. This is not your fault. You are not them. But we are done being on the defensive. Tomorrow morning, I am taking a personal day. We are going to the police station in Bellevue, and we are filing a formal report for attempted wire fraud and elder abuse. I looked up. The police? Yes, Leo. The police. She walked over to me, her eyes locked on mine. He crossed a legal line today. The hospital complaint was a vicious administrative headache. Forging a signature on a HELOC was Sarah's problem. But attempting to scam senior citizens across state lines using a fraudulent routing number, that is a felony. I want a paper trail. If they actually show up at our house, I want the authorities to already know exactly who they are. We didn't eat dinner. I scraped the chicken into the garbage disposal and we went upstairs. The next morning, we sat in a sterile, fluorescent-lit interview room at the Bellevue Police Precinct. A tired-looking detective in a wrinkled short-sleeved shirt took our statement. He typed slowly on a heavy laptop, occasionally asking us to spell out names and verify phone numbers. Without money actually changing hands, it's difficult to prosecute, the detective explained, leaning back in his chair. It's classified as an attempted scheme, but having this on record gives you massive leverage for a restraining order. If he sets foot on your property, or if he contacts your in-laws again, this elevates the response from a simple civil dispute to active harassment and attempted fraud. We left the station at noon. The sky was overcast, a typical Seattle gray. They're driving, I said as we walked to my truck. From Florida to Washington State, it's over 3,000 miles. If they left yesterday, assuming they don't stop much, they'll be here by Tuesday. Let them drive, Cordelia said, pulling her coat tight against the wind. They are driving into a brick wall. The weekend was an agonizing waiting game. Every time a car drove past our house, my chest tightened. I checked the Ring camera app so many times, my phone battery died twice a day. Cordelia spent the weekend cleaning the house top to bottom, a nervous energy she couldn't burn off. On Monday morning, Dr. Eris called Cordelia. The hospital's legal team had reviewed the PDF of the 2018 manifests and the subcontractor's admission of fault. They cleared her completely. The administrative leave was lifted. She could return to her ward on Tuesday. It should have been a victory, but the phone call ended on a sour note. He told me that while I am cleared of any ethical breaches, the optics of the situation are highly disruptive, Cordelia told me, sitting on the edge of our bed, staring at the floor. He suggested I take a leave of absence if my family drama is going to continue spilling into the hospital's inbox. He said the board doesn't like noise. My brother's shadow was still suffocating us. Even in his total failure, he had managed to tarnish the one thing Cordelia had worked her entire life to build, her flawless professional reputation. Tuesday morning arrived. Cordelia went back to work. I stayed home. I had told my division supervisors I was taking the week to work remotely. I couldn't sit in a glass office in Bellevue knowing my parents were somewhere on I-90, barreling toward my front door. At 11:45 a.m., the notification chimed on my phone. Motion detected at the front gate. I was sitting at the kitchen island with my laptop open. My heart slammed against my ribs. I tapped the notification, pulling up the live video feed. It wasn't a rental car. It was my dad's 2016 silver Lincoln Navigator. It was covered in a thick layer of highway grime, the front grille plastered with dead bugs. The roof rack was piled high with blue plastic tarps and bungee cords, strapping down whatever possessions they had managed to salvage from the foreclosure. The rear suspension was visibly sagging under the weight. They looked exactly like refugees, wealthy, entitled refugees who had torched their own kingdom and were now demanding entry into mine. The Navigator idled in front of the heavy iron gates. The driver's side door opened, and my father stepped out. He looked terrible. The drive had aged him 10 years. He was wearing rumpled khakis and a stained golf shirt. His hair was completely disheveled, and he was walking with a pronounced limp. He approached the keypad pedestal, squinting at the directory. He pushed the call button. My phone buzzed with the intercom request. I didn't answer it. I just watched him on the screen. He pushed it again. Then he leaned in, pressing his face close to the camera lens. Leo, open the gate. We've been driving for 4 days. Your mother's back is in spasms. Open the damn gate. His voice crackled through the speaker on my phone. It didn't sound apologetic. It sounded like a demand. He still thought he was the authority figure. He still thought I was the kid who needed to fall in line. I pressed the microphone button on the app. You are trespassing, I said clearly. Turn your car around and leave. My dad physically recoiled from the speaker pedestal. He stared at the camera, his mouth opening and closing. Leo, what the hell is this? Open the gate. We went to Edmund's house, and the locks are changed. There's a bank notice on the door. We have nowhere to go. That is not my problem. Leave. The passenger side door of the Navigator swung open. My mother got out. She looked even worse than my dad. She was holding a crumpled tissue, her face pale and drawn. She hobbled over to the pedestal, pushing my father out of the way. Leo, please, she cried into the camera. We are exhausted. We haven't slept in a bed since Thursday. Please, just let us in to use the bathroom. Just let us sit down. We can talk about this like adults. Adults don't try to steal $60,000 from their daughter-in-law's parents, I said. My voice was ice. My mother froze. froze. She looked at my father, panic flashing across her face. He looked away, staring at the pavement. He hadn't told her. He had tried to run the scam on Arthur and Helen without telling my mother, or she was pretending not to know. It didn't matter. Leo, I don't know what you're talking about, she pleaded, tears spilling over her cheeks. Your father has been out of his mind with stress. We lost the house. We lost everything. Edmund won't answer his phone. We are your parents. You can't leave us out here on the street. Watch me, I said. I will sit here all day, my father suddenly roared, his temper flaring back to life. He slammed his hand against the metal call box. I will park this car right here, blocking your driveway, and I will sit here until you look me in the eye, you ungrateful little bastard. I took my finger off the microphone button. I didn't say another word. I opened a new tab on my phone and dialed the local precinct's non-emergency number. I gave the dispatcher my address and calmly explained that I had 2 aggressive trespassers blocking my driveway, refusing to leave. I mentioned that an incident report regarding these individuals had already been filed the previous day. We'll dispatch a patrol unit, sir. Keep your doors locked and do not engage, the dispatcher said. I hung up and went back to the camera feed. My father was pacing back and forth in front of the gate, kicking at the gravel. My mother was leaning against the SUV, crying into her hands. 10 minutes passed, then 15. A white Bellevue Police Department SUV turned onto our street. It pulled up slowly, its lights flashing silently, and parked directly behind my father's Navigator. I watched on the screen as 2 officers stepped out. My father immediately puffed out his chest, marching toward them, pointing at the gate. I couldn't hear the audio clearly from that distance, but I could see his aggressive body language. He was trying to take control of the narrative. He was trying to play the indignant, wealthy homeowner dealing with a misunderstanding. The taller officer held up a hand, stopping my dad in his tracks. The officer said something, gesturing toward the Navigator. My dad shook his head, pointing at my house. The officer spoke again, his posture rigid. He unclipped his radio. My phone buzzed. It was an unknown number. I answered it. Mr. Vance, this is Officer Miller with Bellevue PD. I'm standing outside your residence. Yes, officer, I'm inside. I have a Thomas and Eleanor Vance here. They claim they are your parents and that they have been invited to stay with you due to a financial emergency. They are my parents. They were not invited. I want them removed from the property, I said. There is a police report on file regarding an attempted wire fraud by Thomas Vance from yesterday. There was a brief pause on the line. Understood, sir. We will ask them to vacate the area. If they refuse, we will cite them for trespassing. Do you want to press charges if they don't comply? Yes. All right, sit tight. I watched the screen. Officer Miller walked back to my dad and said something. My father's face contorted in rage. He lunged forward, not attacking the officer, but trying to push past him toward the gate. The second officer instantly grabbed my father's arm, spinning him around and pressing him face first against the side of his own dirt-covered Navigator. My mother screamed, a shrill, piercing sound that the camera microphone picked up perfectly. She rushed forward, grabbing the officer's shoulder. The taller officer grabbed her by the wrist, pulling her back and shouting an order. My father was yelling, his face smashed against the tinted glass of the SUV. The officer pulled a pair of metal handcuffs from his belt. They weren't just trespassing them anymore. My father had physically resisted, and my mother had grabbed a cop. I sat in my quiet, spotless kitchen, watching the live feed on my phone as my 70-year-old parents were handcuffed on my driveway. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off the wet asphalt. I felt no triumph. I felt no joy. I just felt a hollow, aching emptiness. My phone vibrated in my hand. Another call. It was Edmund. I didn't decline the call. I swiped the green icon and brought the phone to my ear. Leo, what the hell did you do? Edmund's voice was frantic, pitched high with panic. Mom just called me crying. She said the cops were there. She said they were putting Dad in cuffs. What did you do to them? I didn't do anything, Edmund, I said. My voice was steady, completely devoid of the anger that had been burning a hole in my chest for weeks. I sat in my kitchen and watched them face the consequences of their own actions, just like I'm watching you face yours. You called the cops on our parents. Are you insane? You have to go out there and tell them it's a mistake. You have to drop the charges. There is no mistake, I replied. Dad resisted. Mom grabbed an officer. That's assault. They made their choices. Z, Leo, please, he was begging now, the bravado entirely gone. I'm at a motel, 6 inches Tacoma. I don't have a car. I don't have a credit card that works. Sarah won't answer. I have $60 to my name. If they go to jail, who's going to bail them out? I can't do it. I know you can't, I said. And I won't. They'll be processed at the station. A judge will set bail tomorrow morning. I suggest they call a bail bondsman. They can put up the Navigator as collateral, assuming the bank hasn't repossessed it yet. You're a monster. Edmund spat, his voice cracking. They're old, Leo. You're just gonna let them rot in a cell because you're still crying about a PowerPoint presentation? It was never about the PowerPoint, I said softly. It was about the fact that you all thought I was weak enough to let you drag me down with you. I'm not. Do not ever contact me or my wife again. I pulled the phone away from my ear, hit end, and blocked his number. Then I called a local towing company and reported an abandoned vehicle blocking my gate. By the time Cordelia got home that evening, the Navigator was gone. The driveway was empty. The flashing lights were just a memory. I was sitting at the dining room table, a glass of bourbon in front of me, staring out at the water. She walked in, set her bag down, and saw my face. She didn't ask questions. She just walked over, pulled out the chair next to me, and sat down. They came, I said quietly. Dad got aggressive with the police. They were both arrested. Cordelia nodded slowly. She reached out and placed her hand over mine. Are you okay? I don't know, I admitted. I feel like I should be devastated. I feel like I should be grieving, but I just feel light. You're allowed to feel light, she said. You put down a burden you were never supposed to carry in the first place. The fallout over the next few months was exactly as ugly as I expected, but it happened entirely at a distance. I didn't pay their bail. They spent 2 nights in county jail before a public defender managed to get them released on their own recognizance, pending a court date. The bank repossessed the Navigator a week later. With nowhere else to go and absolutely zero assets left, my parents ended up moving into a low-income senior living complex in Spokane, heavily subsidized by the state. They were close to Sarah and the kids, but Sarah enforced strict boundaries. She only allowed them to see Mason and Lily once a month, supervised, in public places. Edmund didn't fare as well. The local loan sharks he owed money to didn't care about his sob story. When he couldn't pay, they didn't break his legs, they just sued him in civil court, attaching a lien to whatever future wages he might ever owe. The state also opened an investigation into his mishandling of the kids' 529 plans. Last Next, I heard through a brief email from Sarah. He was working the night shift at a fulfillment warehouse in Kent, renting a single room in a shared house, taking the bus to work. He was scrubbing floors, just like I did. I never went back to that storage unit. A week after the police took my parents away, I hired a junk removal company. I gave them the gate code, the unit number, and the key to the padlock. I told them to empty it out, take it all to the dump, and keep whatever they thought was valuable. I didn't want the manifests. I didn't want the old mattress. I didn't want the notebook with my soup budget written in it. I didn't need the physical proof of my survival anymore. I was living it. Thanksgiving came around 6 months later. For the first time in years, I didn't make up an excuse about expensive flights or mandatory overtime. We didn't travel anywhere. We stayed in Seattle. Cordelia's parents drove up from Portland. Arthur brought 2 bottles of very expensive wine, and Helen brought her famous sweet potato casserole. We spent the afternoon cooking in the kitchen, drinking wine, and listening to old jazz records. The house smelled like rosemary and butter. There was no tension. There were no sarcastic jokes. Nobody was waiting for the other shoe to drop. After dinner, while Arthur and Cordelia were arguing good-naturedly over a game of Scrabble in the living room, I stepped out onto the back deck. The air was crisp and biting, the kind of deep Pacific Northwest cold that wakes you up. I leaned against the railing, looking out at the dark expanse of the water, watching the ferry boats cut through the sound. I thought about the $14 bank balance. I thought about the 2004 Honda Civic. I thought about the smell of the biohazard chemicals that used to stick to my skin, no matter how hard I scrubbed. Those years didn't break me. They forged me into a man who knew exactly what a dollar was worth, exactly what loyalty meant, and exactly what he was willing to lose to protect his peace. My family had tried to use my darkest moments as a weapon against me. Instead, it became the very armor that kept them out. I took a deep breath of the freezing air, let it out in a slow cloud of white mist, and went back inside to my real family.